which is entitled Rubicon. So this was a song that I remember, it was probably one of the last songs that I wrote for the album, like musically speaking and recording wise. It was very late in the year, like 2017 when I initially got around to doing this song. And yeah, like late in the year and maybe early in like January, February, like recording some bass parts and vocals and stuff like that, which I remember like the initial vocals I just did in like a couple of takes um at my old church. Like one Saturday afternoon, I got permission to use the facility, and basically I went in there and needed to lay down some bass parts and got through those pretty quickly because I didn't own my own bass at the time. I do now, but um, like I used a couple of basses that were laying around there, and yeah, finished those quickly and was like, well, let me try to lay down vocals, and just it came like that. And pretty, I'm very positive that I re-recorded them, but it was just kind of like done on the fly sort of thing. And the thing about this song is that it's essentially very repetitive. May not exactly seem that way, but like I purposefully wrote it out as like verse, bridge, chorus, and that's it. And it repeats, like 4 or 5 times. I can't remember. I think 4 times. So it ends up being like 11 minutes and 30 seconds or something like that, I think. It's the longest song on the entire album. Um, but of course, I wanted to do variations and change the tone. It kind of starts out just this ambient guitar line, um, like heavy reverb and effects going on, and then comes in with some acoustic guitar, um, left channel, like reverse delay, and right channels. I don't know, like I think I used a slap echo or something like that. And then it just slowly builds up until like distortion comes in, and it's more like a hard rock kind of high treble sort of distortion. And then like the more like metal distortion comes in like at the last verse or whatever. And so I didn't want to like scream or do a whole lot of that in this song. This was, I mean, there's some like background parts where I'm like growling or whatever towards the end of the song, but pretty much I sing the entire song, which I hate my voice, but what are you going to do? Um, but specifically, I wanted this song musically to be repetitive like that, just like a praise and worship song in your typical Christian evangelical contemporary whatever. Um, but at the same time, I wanted it to be a little more complicated than just like a G C D C, like four chord kind of progression sort of thing. Like I wanted to use some like weirder chords, or stuff that would be a little harder to play, but still like, I guess, semi like major kind of progression for the most part, I guess. But yeah, I wanted it to kind of have like a praise and worship vibe to it without like, I mean, maybe it is a praise and worship song, you know, because I mean, that was sort of like what I set out to do in some ways with this album was that I wanted to write, like church music that isn't just cliche or, easily digestible. And I may not be into that sort of thing, but I understand that, there is a reason that people like that sort of stuff because it is easily digestible. Like it just is what it is. But I wanted this to be something a little more complicated than just that. And so, like, pretty much all of this song is like a self reflection and going into like actual history, which I'm not a historian. I mean, yeah, I took like AP US history or whatever in high school and had to take some history courses in college and all, but like history was never like my strongest suit. Like, yeah, I did okay or whatever, but like, especially back then, history didn't, like, I wasn't into it. But like, the older I get, the more I see that, there's a lot to glean when it comes to history. And so, like, pretty much like four of like my closest friends, they're all like historians. Um, like my best friend Evan, like when it comes to like World War II history, and then like Mongolian, like Genghis Khan, like that is his bread and butter. Like he will talk to you all day about that stuff, and like it's cool. Like straight up, like I'm actually interested to listen to it. Like 20 years ago it would have bored me to tears, but now I'm like, this is cool. There's a lot to glean from this. um like my dude Tyler, he's uh he was a history major and all. I think Bubbles, if you're watching this, you studied history too, if I remember correctly. And then uh, my my dudette, Trisha, she's pretty much got a history degree too. So like all my friends, like they're just like into history and like can go on about history stuff. But I was more like the philosopher, I guess, or theologian. But it's not like my strong suit, like I said, but this is like kind of a just looking back at history. Um, they said you're more than a conqueror, but a warlording conquistador was expected. And that's how the song opens up, um, of him kind of the protagonist talking to himself in like third person, is that like he was expected to, be this conquistador, even though like, does that have anything to do with being more than a conqueror? And that's the question, isn't it? Um, so something that I forgot to kind of mention with yesterday's entry, uh, like so prodigals, the revolution and stuff like that. Keep in mind that like the protagonist has left the city, he's on his journey again, but like he's having to kind of deal with what just happened in the city and do some self-reflection. And with prodigals, that song kind of has a personal meaning, I suppose, to me. That like I mentioned a few days ago, church that I was a part of, and all for a little while. And like at a certain point, I think I was, I wouldn't say I was like revolutionary or anything like that, but I wanted to see a lot of change in the place. And because I was, I guess, vocal about a lot of my views and, theological views, or even just like the praxis of what, church is supposed to be like. I mean, maybe I did influence some of the people around me. And maybe because of that, they started to question things too. Um, but did anything change? No, not really. I ended up leaving that church and going to another one. Um, but here, and even back then, like after all this stuff happened, um, with like leaving that place, just the questions come in of, like, did I do the right thing? Um, and yeah, just self-reflection. That's what's going on in this song, but just looking at other people and just history in general. um and so like the chorus is like a variation of saying like, gird your loins, pray for your salvation, for crossing the river has no turning back. That's at least the first chorus, but like the second one says, gird our loins, pray for our salvation, for we cross this stream with no turning back. um and so like the second verse um deals with like um the uh Pentateuch narrative, um, Exodus, um, like Moses and the burning bush and Pharaoh and the Red Sea, and kind of like looking at that biblical narrative, but sort of personalizing it to himself. Of, are we, am I, you know, myself, sure, but like I is in the protagonist in this story of, are we really going towards this like promised land? um or is it just something that people are declaring with like the divine rights of kings, this like medieval concept of like, you can't question the king because he has this like divine right to rule. um and then like the third verse goes into, they're all but dead now. The spoils of holy wars are buried. The denial of Cain's toil. So going back to like Cain and Abel, and just the idea of war, um, and just his self-reflecting on his days at war, even though they're kind of distant at that point. Um, he says, today in the soil before this river with regrets, I almost hear predecessors standing in the same footsteps. Before the Rubicon, did Julius Caesar wonder what would Romulus and Remus do? And Romulus and Remus, um, according to like Greek mythos, Roman Greek mythos, they were like two brothers who founded the city of Rome. So because of them, like the Roman Empire exists, and it mentions suckling from a she wolf's breast before like marching, to war or whatever. But there's like it's from myth, when it comes to these two brothers. But there's like also this famous uh, like statue, like bronze statue. Like, is it a Rodin? I can't remember, but I remember studying it in college. It's basically like this she wolf with these big udders, and like underneath it is the two brothers, like like trying to suckle at her breasts. And it's based on myth of they were like raised like in the wild by this like female wolf sort of thing. Um, and like the irony of it was when I wrote this, I didn't even know like the ending of the myth, but like a couple of months ago, I was actually reading up more on like Romulus and Remus, and like the story apparently goes that when they went to form the city of Rome, they were like, well, let's like base it around like a mountain, like a central kind of mountain sort of thing. And like one brother chose like one mountain and the other one chose another one, and they couldn't agree like which of the two mountains the city should be based around. And I think they like basically did spoil or like cast lots or something like that, something kind of random, and it turned out to be one mountain over the other, and I think it was Romulus. He won that wager or whatever, but or no, it was Remus, I believe. I can't remember. Either way, one of them got what they wanted, and the other brother ended up being like jealous and resentful of that, and ended up murdering uh, his brother. And I think that was Romulus murdered Remus, if I remember correctly. So it would have been like Remus Mountain was where they uh, built the city. And so like that, like I had no idea when I wrote this song, like lyrically, that that was part of the myth. And when I read that a couple of months ago, I was like, nice, it really kind of fits into what this song's talking about. Um, and so one of the other things that I wanted to go from here was not just like focus on Julius Caesar, because Julius Caesar asking like what would Romulus and Remus do is just like me, wondering, did he really, when he crossed the Rubicon, do that? Because like the story is like Caesar was, he came to the Rubicon River. He was gonna like march on Rome and basically become Caesar. He was gonna take over. And when he came to the Rubicon River, um he knew like he could either turn back and that would be that, or he would continue forward, not knowing whether he would find success or failure. And so that's what the Rubicon is supposed to represent, is the question of like, do I turn back or do I march forward? Because once I cross this river, I cannot turn back. And I'm either going to be a success or I'm going to be a failure. And in these cases, it's life or death sort of thing. Um, so go from there and talk about Napoleon. Because, I mean, Napoleon's not really like crossing the Rubicon, but like going into like Moscow and Russia, like he had to uh, face the Niemen River, and it's like the opposite in some ways, because like Julius Caesar, well, he ends up becoming Caesar of Rome. Um, Mind you, like he ends up getting betrayed, right, and murdered, but that's something else entirely. But here it is, Napoleon wants to march on the world and empire build, and goes into Russia. He's got to cross a river too, and what happens there? Well, ends up not going in his favor, because like scorched earth kind of policy sort of stuff. um, in the dead of winter, he made a bad military decision, lost like a lot of his men. Like I can't remember the exact number. Like my dudes would be able to tell you probably like the exact number and like hundreds of thousands or whatever. But the point being, like it was pretty much Napoleon's like death blow because like tried to get to Moscow, didn't work out, so he turns around and loses like a third of his army or something like that, and because of that is basically disgraced, and there's a coup and all that stuff. And then also there's like a Louis Napoleon, um, another French coup d'etat of 1851 that I mentioned there, and it was like I think Louis Napoleon was like maybe he was like a great or grandson or something like that, but it's the same thing of just wars and coups and just empire building and gird a nation's loins and pray for countrymen's salvation for cooing a river, trying to like dam a river or just overtake a river, makes no turning back, you know. And then at the end, I've decided to follow Jesus, but I didn't decide this direction. I found a nihilistic love where God failed at being my headwater, which is me reflecting on my past, um, of just being disappointed and frustrated, still being, like a Christian and everything, but like I've mentioned before, of just this sort of like practical nihilism of sorts of like, this is all there is. And all I've got to look forward to is a long life of just trying to get by. And then one day I'm just going to die. And yeah, I'll probably get to heaven or whatever, but like, who cares about this life? It's just a misery kind of thing. So that's me, like referring to that time in my life, at like the end of my 20s, basically. Um, Yet he brought me to the river flow. Will there be an estuary leading to sea? Jesus, what would you do in these shoes? Which, yeah, Jesus, what would Jesus do is a cliche, but, sometimes we all have to ask ourselves, like, what would he do if he was me? Um, and so, what this song is the reflection of is the protagonist in his journey has come to this river and he's thinking about his past and he has no idea where he's going. That I guess is the one difference in this song, is that he has absolutely no idea where he's heading. He's doesn't know if he's heading to Rome. He doesn't know if he is, just no way of knowing, but all he knows is that he's made a decision to follow Jesus, and he knows that he can't turn back once he crosses this river. And the irony of it at the end is, well, I've already crossed this river, so I can't turn back. I've already made this decision. And so what this song like means to me personally is all the times in my life when I realized that I had crossed the threshold of no turning back. And at the time that I wrote this, in the back of my head was the woman I wanted to marry. And the fact that like I had made decision after decision after decision of like, I want to be with her and spend the rest of my life, with her. And a lot of it, I mean, it was choice, but a lot of it seemed almost like thrust onto me in like some sort of existential, spiritual, whatever way. Um, And it's like you get to that like river of that like decision of whether I say no or whether I continue forward. And it's like every time it's like, well, I guess I'll go forward. And the thing is, like, when I wrote this song, I knew I'd come to those like moments of being in front of this river, over and over and over again. But like in some ways, when I wrote it, it was almost like I knew that I still hadn't arrived at the river, where it was like I knew it was coming in my future, that there was going to come some sort of penultimate decision that I was going to have to make when it came to all that stuff with her, that like I wasn't going to be able to turn away from if I crossed that line. And like it took about a year after I wrote these initial lyrics, but like that like decision came of, like, I mean, I don't want to go too far into it, but like I was posed in my belief. I wouldn't say like I heard the audible voice of God or whatever, but it was like one night I heard still small voice. Just this thought popped in my head over something that my mentor and I, like, we had like a very heated argument, um, a few months before she died, um, concerning that woman that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. And we were both like angry and frustrated and basically yelling at each other. And, I asked her, like how the hell long am I supposed to wait? You know, like this is my life. This is like, and I was like just blunt with her, is like, yo, I would like to like get laid sooner or later. Like, like I'm a dude. What's up? And like, I mean, my mentor, she was the coolest because she just like looked at me and kind of nodded. She was like, yeah, that would be nice. And like, she totally understood it. Like, no judgments there. Like, she is human as well. Like, she understood, but it was like, look, it's not even about like getting laid. Like, I just want to settle down, have a life, and have a family. Like, what about what I want? And she, like, I knew her past. Like, she had waited for her ex-husband to come back to her for like 18 years because like he left her for another woman, and like his mistress sort of thing. And she like literally, I mean, who does that? Wait 18 years for somebody to come back? And like I used that against her in that moment. Like, I kind of regret it, but it was what it was. I was like, am I supposed to wait the next 18 years of my damn life? And she turned to me with like tears in her eyes. And sorry. She she said to me, like, you wait as long as it takes, even if for the rest of your life. And I was like, you're full of shit. Like, I told her straight up, I was like, that's bullshit. And then a year later, that still small voice was like, are you willing to wait as long as it takes? And it was like my own words just turned against me. And it took me weeks to like come up to a decision of that. Do I cross that river or not? Um, do I go that direction of, and like I said, I don't want to go too far into it. I've gone further into this than I really wanted or planned to. But, one night I broke down and said yes. um, that I would. And so this song kind of means something to me of making that kind of decision that you know it's going to affect the rest of your life, no matter like what happens after that. Like the destination at that point, I mean, it matters, sure, but it's like the decision itself of turning around or going forward, that's maybe the more important part. And so it ends saying, they said you're more than a conqueror, but never knew their meaning while they lusted for war. Even still, I found a context. Neither death nor life can separate us from the love of God. And, you know, when it comes to crossing that metaphorical, allegorical, whatever you want to call it, Rubicon, it's like, I mean, yeah, the end product does matter. I'm not saying it doesn't, obviously. Yet at the same time, it's like whether ends in life, death, suffering, defeat, conquest, success, whatever, like nothing can separate us from God's love. Those things can't separate us. Um, and I'm saying that not because I found success in those situations, because I didn't, and I'm not definitely not getting into that story right now. At least if I don't know if I'll ever necessarily tell that's, you know, in this music or anything. But I'm just saying, like Caesar and other people, other historical figures, they marched, you know, for conquest, and they found success. A lot of people in this life find that same kind of success, but equally so are the people who march, hopefully in good faith with good intentions or whatever, and it doesn't end good. It does end in defeat or failure or whatever, and a lot of times we as Christians don't want to admit that to ourselves, that like you can try your hardest to walk in faith and still turn out horribly. It was that way for me. But the point is, like, can't that can't separate you from the love of God. It's, that's the gospel right there.